Right now, there are a lot of prominent investors and market strategists who disagree on how this bubble finally pops, and these aren't people I easily dismiss, and they fall into both categories. I'm talking about people such as Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, Jeremy Grantham, Michael Burry, Brent Johnson, Peter Schiff, David Hunter, and others. And they disagree on how the market gets from this state of sky-high valuations to a future economy. So in other words, does the current overvalued market lead to immediate inflation right away? Or is there a more complex way that this unwinds such that we actually first experience deflation and then inflation? So to be clear, they all agree that inflation is coming at some point in the future, but some think that we could actually have an unwinding process that produces a deflationary environment first. So today I'm going to present both sides of this tough argument to hopefully help you understand both sides better. And I personally am not going to argue for a particular side, I'm just going to present both of them to you. So we'll start off with the immediate inflation pathway. And the supporters behind this side appear to be people such as Peter Schiff, Ray Dalio, and more recently Michael Burry. Peter Schiff, he's the guy he also has a YouTube channel, but he's the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. He basically says he's been saying that inflation has been coming for a while now, and yeah, he recommends hedging it with gold. Ray Dalio, a famous investor very similar to Warren Buffett, also thinks that inflation is coming just due to all of the money printing, and Michael Burry more recently has come out with warnings of inflation, just again due to all of the money printing and quantitative easing that has gone on. The argument behind this pathway is pretty simple. Basically, central banks have been increasing the money supply for decades now, and at an increasing rate through measures such as quantitative easing, money printing, and now, direct payment to consumers. And generally, this will lead to a day of reckoning. It basically has to. All fiat currencies function on the law of supply and demand, and basically when there's an oversupply of the currency, the value has to fall at some point in the future. And yeah, investors and the general public generally have to wake up finally and realize that, wait a minute, 50% of all the dollars that ever existed were just printed in the last year. There's something wrong here, and as a result, the dollar will fall in value potentially very rapidly in relation to stores of value. Ray Dalio has come out and said that he thinks the dollar could fall from the status of the world reserve currency, and that this could come sooner than most people think. Michael Burry has compared the actions of the Fed to the Central Bank of Germany prior to the hyperinflation that resulted in the early 20th century. And this side also disagrees with what a good store of value is. Peter Schiff believes it is gold and nothing else. Burry and Dalio lean toward more other assets, such as stocks, valuable companies, productive companies, real estate, and land. So right off the bat, this side of immediate inflation occurring at some point in the near future gives a pretty compelling argument that sounds like the only real logical answer. For example, how could anything else happen but inflation? So this side gives a very mathematical and logical progression with their argument. And now we get into the deflation side, and again, this side is not arguing that this deflation goes on for a very long time, but they argue that it's a temporary occurrence before inflation finally happens. So the only way they would disagree from the group I just discussed is they would say that yes, inflation is coming, but first some deflation needs to happen as the bubble unwinds. And in this camp you also have a lot of very notable people such as Jeremy Grantham, Brent Johnson, David Hunter, and Stephen Van Meter. And I've talked about several of these people before, just like several of the people up in the inflation camp. Jeremy Grantham just wrote another great article, Waiting for the Last Dance. Brent Johnson, he is essentially the creator of the dollar milkshake theory, if you have ever heard of that. David Hunter, I've also mentioned him before. And generally, all of these people just point out all of the leverage that's in the system, and they say that it has to occur, it has to cause some level of deflation first before the inflation finally comes. And their argument generally goes something like this. The dollar is currently the reserve currency, and therefore it would behave differently than a different currency even during times of massive monetary supply expansion. And furthermore, hundreds of trillions of global debt are dollar denominated, meaning that should a large event of debt liquidation happen, this would essentially create a sort of dollar short squeeze, and actually could send the dollar's value up briefly before the real inflation kicks in as the economy begins to recover. And this is basically what their argument follows. In some way, shape, or form, a lot of them also point out just the astronomical level of derivatives that are currently in the financial markets, such as David Hunter. He really points that out a lot. And most notably, Brent Johnson's dollar milkshake theory is essentially kind of a good way of summarizing what a lot of them are pointing at. Essentially what they are saying, and what Brent Johnson would say, is that even though the Fed is printing money at a faster and faster rate than pretty much whatever they've done in the past, this won't matter during this brief period of time because of all of the debt that is dollar denominated, meaning it's based in dollars. And this is important to understand, that because the dollar is currently the reserve currency, even in other countries where the local currency might be the yen or the won or whatever it might be, it is likely the case that a lot of the debts taken on in this country are actually based in dollars. And this is done so that investors in these foreign countries, from wherever they are based in the world, they don't need to convert to the local currency. They can just instead purchase these bonds in dollars, which is currently the most common global currency. And it's important to note that these groups do agree with how we do eventually reach inflation. They do agree that inflation is the final endpoint. And more importantly, all of these individuals do agree that some sort of financial crisis is in the works right now. Whether it is as brief as what happened last spring in 2020, or as drawn out as the Great Depression, they differ in their opinion, but they all do agree that obviously the kinds of extreme valuations and euphoria that is going on right now cannot continue. And that, in the end, once we begin to recover from this crash and from all of the bankruptcies that will occur, inflation will begin to kick in. So I guess they don't disagree on very much, but it will be curious, for me at least, to see how this does end up playing out. Whether it's deflation, inflation, a mixture of the two, only time will really tell what ends up happening. And I hope you guys really enjoyed this video I made. If you like this kind of content, you just consider subscribing to this channel, and I hope to see you again.